Situating ourselves to see what's going on a distributed logical router can be tricky because it's distributed. But we have a couple of central points of focus that can make it easier. And that's going to be when we sit down at the CLI of either a distributed logical router control VM or a control cluster virtual machine to view those DLR properties. And in this nugget, you're going to learn how to do exactly that. One of the things that can be confusing sometimes for people is how we handle the distributed logical router when it comes to CLI access. I mean, what am I going to connect to? Do I connect to the ESXi device? Do I connect to the control cluster, which governs some of the behaviors of a distributed logical router? Or do I connect to the control VM? And the answer is kind of all of the above, depending on the kind of information that you're looking for. Accessing the DLR information on ESXi itself is actually very specialized, and it's going to use a very specific separate command line tool. So let's look at what we see from the control cluster and the control VM of a DLR. So in our list of VMs here, we see the control VM for the distributed router. Remember, this is required if we want to be able to support dynamic routing protocols and configuration of the DLR firewall. We'll select it and click on the Summary tab. And if it's accessible and configured to support Secure Shell, we could also use a command line tool like PuTTY. The control VM interface that supports a DLR is equivalent to connecting to an edge VM device, except for the fact that the DLR simply supports fewer services. But the interface is going to be the same, so we can type in a question mark and see the list of options available to us. We could type in show question mark to see the available information to see. We could type in show IP question mark and see familiar statements here. Show address, there's our list of interfaces. Show IP route will show me the local routing table. So the CLI skills you learn in managing an edge device do play over in being able to see what's going on the control VM that supports the DLR. But let's back out of here and go one step up and take a look at the controller. To view CLI information from the controller perspective, we can use the front door, back door options as well. So we can secure shell into a controller device, or we could log on directly using the console. Now, logging on directly to the console is usually not a great option. It's not a beautiful interface, but if you can't access a device remotely using Secure Shell, this may be your only option. So when we click the thumbnail and log on as admin, the most commonly used command here might be show network interface, which will in fact display the interface, and we can validate the up status, which means it is available to actually reach the network. Let me just type in an X here and press enter, which triggers seeing a bunch of prompts. From the controller interface, we can also do a restart or a shutdown if we're having some issues with the current configuration. Most of the time, though, if it's possible, I'd much prefer to use Secure Shell. So let's close that interface, bring up PuTTY, my Secure Shell tool, and here's the controller's IP address ready to load in. If we type in a question mark and press enter, we can get the list of the commands that are available to us. So we could do show network, and we can see the different aspects of the network that we could see, like show network routes. But this is where it's important not to get confused. You're viewing how the controller is managing its own routing, which means it's connected directly into the 110 network, and it has a default gateway set to point to 110.1. That's all we're seeing. This is nothing about how NSX is doing virtualized routing. This is just how the controller is accessing the network. I don't want us getting lost in terms of configuration. But let's take a look at show controller-cluster commands. There's a ton of these, and they're very important. From controller cluster, we can view things like show logical switches, as well as show logical routers. To see things from the router perspective, we can type in show control-cluster, logical-routers. So we could type in instance space all, which is the bottom example. Press enter, and here's a list of all of our DLRs. And you'll notice that there's a logical router ID and a logical router name, and that there are many commands that will reveal information about the logical router by referencing its logical router ID. So that means that first value is what we're going to call for. So for example, show logical router routes 0x1388 shows us that the router has not learned any routes yet. Instead of routes, how about interface -summary? So now we're seeing this specific DLR has 3 enabled interfaces plugged into these VXLAN, identified by their VXLAN IDs, and we can see the IP addresses that are plugged into each one of those. My friend, that's enough for now. We just needed to have the framework to see how we can access some of the DLR information from the perspective of the control VM which functions just like an edge device, and the separate higher level perspective of a control cluster node. So if we've enabled a control cluster to support unicast communication, we've got a whole nother framework to view and troubleshoot our routers and switches by using the CLI on that controller. My friend, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.